Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know if you guys know me, but my mom's Israeli. I'm Israeli. My mom was born there and was raised there until she was about 16 or 17. And one of the main differences, at least when she was growing up, between here, Canada, and Israel, is that it's a little bit more difficult to voice your opinion in a place where, especially at the time, women weren't exactly put on a pedestal, to say the least. So at the time, my mom tried to voice her opinion in class, and what would happen is, some of you were holding textbooks, it would be launched at her head. And I don't know if you guys all go to TCS, so you kind of know the feeling. If you were to raise a question in class, that wouldn't exactly happen. So pretty much the goal and the hope when my mom moved to Canada was that she would be able to raise a son or a daughter in an environment where I had the ability to affect change. And when I was a young boy, all I wanted to do was change the world. I mean, I think we can all agree that something that we want to do in life is leave our mark on the world, is to do something. So, but the issue is as I grew older, I realized that it was increasingly difficult. I realized that Canada is catching laryngitis. And what's laryngitis? Laryngitis is really the fancy medical term for saying that we're losing our voice. But what does that mean? It means that civil societies, organizations, so CSOs for short, are beginning to lose their voice in Canadian politics. So what does that mean for us? It means that it's becoming increasingly difficult to have our voice heard on a larger scale. So civil society in Canada is dying, but what is a civil society? A civil society is the connection between the people and the government. They're the organizations that allow us to speak to them, they speak to the government, and push policy that is for the people. So in Canada, we have civil societies for just about anything. If you want to join an organization, if you want pro-abortion, pro-Aboriginal rights, something for foreign affairs, you can join a CSO in Canada that will help you accomplish those goals. Now, where does it work? So, New Zealand. New Zealand is an excellent example of a place where 70% of the population is engaged in one CSO or another. That's a pretty staggering number if you ask me. Because can you guys identify yourselves, at least 70% of you, being involved in a CSO? Before I even started researching, before I came to the school, I didn't know what a CSO was. So how could I possibly say that I've been involved in one? So, in New Zealand, there are two large CSOs, one called Aotearoa and one called the New Zealand Grant Funding. And what the goal of the New Zealand Grant Funding is to engage students and kids our age, 12 to 24, in politics and try to get them involved. And the New Zealand government is so vested in their civil society that it flourishes in its own right. So where does Canada fit into all this? Well, we aren't those guys, and we definitely aren't those guys. But Canadian civil society isn't as hunky-dory as you'd imagine. The fact of the matter is, we do rank second in EEI index, which measures the participation of the population in civil society. And to me that sounded fantastic, and I thought it was delightful. But I started looking into it, and the case is that, well, it doesn't really matter if everyone's involved in civil society if the civil society organizations have no power. So what's happening in Canada is that we have all these people, we have a large percentage of our population, still not quite 70, but we have a large percentage that's engaged in a civil society or another, but those civil societies have no power because they're being silenced by our government. So how do we expect the civil society organizations to respond effectively to our needs if the government that is supposed to encourage their participation isn't allowing them to? So what I'm trying to say is that the entire population can be participating in a CSO, but it doesn't matter at the end of the day if the government won't let them. So what am I trying to do? I'm trying to allow you guys to feel the metaphorical suffocation that's killing Canada's civil society organizations in cold blood with no justice in the foreseeable future. Because the things that are being hindered aren't necessarily civil society organizations. It's you guys. It's the future. It's when you want to affect change, are you going to be able to? And right now, the way things are going, the answer is no. So, since I am part of this generation, I spent a lot of time thinking and researching. I wanted to find out how such a socially diverse country with a high EEI rating could be getting slammed by the international community, such as the Nigeria Labour Congress, who we're supposed to be helping their civil society grow, but meanwhile they're telling us that ours doesn't work. So I looked into the NGOs themselves. I figured there must be an issue. Well, what I realized is that they've actually been growing over the last 10 years, so I smiled a bit. But I looked further into it, and I was mortified. While some of them are becoming true players in the political system, the smaller ones, the more radical ones that are fighting for the more extreme beliefs that are sometimes less progressive, are being wiped away. So for example, the Canadian Centre for Philanthropy did a survey, and what they found is that 49% of people believe that CSOs over the last few years have had to terminate because of a lack of government funding. And furthermore, 90% of Canadians think that the government has no interest in helping out the CSOs whatsoever like they did in the past. Meanwhile, the larger CSOs seem to be getting larger and more powerful every year. And it's an interesting thing to look at as to how the correlation between them getting larger and their clashes with the government becoming fewer and far between. The Canadian government over its history has been known for doing good deeds for the CSOs, for helping them, for helping them become larger. But what happens when that same government that was trying to help them flourish is now deciding that that good mentality might not be in their best interest? So the reality of today is that if you don't agree with the government, the Harper Conservative government has been known to target and to help you change your focus so that your ideas are now a little bit more government friendly. So if that doesn't frighten you, I'm really not sure what will. And I don't think I've put this into context enough. What I'm suggesting is that the government is trying to silence all of us. And the government's right to rule is determined by the people. That's how you define political legitimacy. But if the people can't tell the government what they want, then how can a government call themselves legitimate? It's quite the conundrum. So, what's happening is that any NGO that's deemed to pose an immediate threat to the government is pretty much, the government now uses a whole host of pressure tactics to influence them. One of these pressure tactics are called audits. Now, how audits work is that the government will go in and look through all of the records and all of the books of these NGOs and all these CSOs and say, you guys didn't pay a tax on this that you didn't know about, we've put this new tax in the last few months, and they'll find reasons to tie them up and reasons to cut their funding. So while the government calls it random and fair, why is it suddenly large foundations like the David Suzuki Foundation and the Environmental Defense and other prominent NGOs who've been well respected over the last 10 years in Canada are suddenly being audited for no reason? What they do, and what the government does, is when they smell someone is starting to get riled up and want change and see something wrong, they have now allocated $8 million in 2012 alone just to lawyer fees to audit these NGOs and CSOs. Now, $8 million isn't a huge number in the grand scheme of things, but imagine the amount of time and the amount of lawyers that can buy to tie up many NGOs. So, an example of this, and an example of a company, well, on the other side, so that was larger NGOs, but what's happening to the smaller NGOs? Well, the government of Canada can't exactly just audit them like they were doing. Well, they can, but a much more effective tactic for the smaller NGOs is that they'll just cut their funding. Because the larger NGOs aren't as dependent on government funding because they're so large that they have outside money. So what happens with the smaller ones, like the Mennonite Mining Group, is that they end up falling between the cracks because the government has decided to cut their funding. And while you might say, well, it's maybe just not on the top of the list of priorities, well, it's rather ironic that their funding was cut very recently after they voiced their opinion about a mining disaster that happened overseas. And that's what they fight for. And the Canadian government didn't want that getting out, so what do? They cut their funding. And that's how it's been working in Canada. Now, you might be wondering, how does this directly affect me? Because that's kind of what I went through for over the last little while. I was kind of trying to figure out, well, this is an issue, but why should I get involved right now? Well, we're all students, and why don't you look at the Quebec student protests that happened in the last few years? Well, what happened is that the students were taking to the streets and trying to voice their opinion to the government and trying to tell them that there was something wrong. So how did the government respond? Well, they enacted a bill that cut out 9 basic rights guaranteed by the Charter. Now, I don't know how you feel about that, but if I feel passionately enough that I'm going to go out into the streets and voice my opinion despite police throwing pepper spray and trying to arrest me, it would really push me over the edge if now they're taking away 9 basic rights. That is a catastrophe that should never have happened if there were prominent NGOs and CSOs that were able to fight for our rights. So up until now, I've given a pretty grim outlook on Canadian civil society. But I feel like it's the only way to allow you to understand how bad it really is. That's worth fighting for, and that directly affects you. The fact of the matter is that without civil society, the government's control is unprecedented. And without the CSOs and NGOs to keep them in check, and not agreeing with the party's policies, anything can happen, which is the ironic part of all of it, because the NGOs and the CSOs are the ones being persecuted. So, on top of that, if they decide to become corrupt and mercilessly attack NGOs and CSOs for not agreeing with their policy by means of, I don't know, audits, NGOs aren't in place to expose them if we continue down this road. But I didn't come here to tell you today that the fight is lost. I didn't come here today to tell you that there's nothing we can do. You, the people in this room, and those abroad who are interested in international politics, are in a unique position. Because since the mid-2000s, the government of Canada, yes, has in fact damaged a once flourishing civil society. That doesn't mean it can't change back to how it used to be. So what needs to be done, or what is currently being done? You have this man named Daniel Paradis, who is the Minister of International Affairs. And he has recently gone to a high-level UN meeting in Mexico to discuss the prospect underlining Canada's commitment to working group and stress the importance of civil society. Now this suggests that it's actually, if he's willing to go to a UN meeting, it would suggest that this is now going to be at the forefront of our list of priorities on the home front. Furthermore, Paradis will be entering a conference, again held in Mexico in April, pertaining to the development of a proper civil society in Mexico. So again, this is an example of Canada going out of the home front to establish civil societies in other places. So hopefully it'll trickle down. So it's nice to see that someone within the government is doing something to fight for this, but it really isn't about within the government at this point. It's about the people in this room. We need to show the government that we recognize that there's an issue. We need to show the government that we know that there's a problem and that we will not just sit around and let them bully us around and let them silence us. We need to stand up for what we believe in. Because we need to restore, and I'm entrusting this generation with the project to restore Canada's civil society to back to how it was, with a functioning discourse between the government and the people. I implore you to take this seriously, because the thing about civil society is that you really don't know that it's there until you've lost it all. Thank you.